guess what? I got a Discord server. Greetings, everybody, and welcome back to the Ash of Creation discussion round, episode number 100. How
we
is
got
everybody
Steven
doing?
here.
Oh, yeah, we
How
got
exciting!
He's gonna go off topic with us all over the place.
Yeah, we're so going off topic today.
Now that's become the theme.
So first up, Steven, thank you for joining us. It's been a privilege to do this podcast, so we really do appreciate you being with us. And
Yeah, absolutely. I'm very excited. Congratulations on 100 episodes. That's pretty crazy.
Thank you. I mean,
We did our 4-year anniversary a couple months ago, and then today's the 100th episode. Longest running Ash of Creation podcast.
Exactly.
That is a feat.
I would say we just jump right into it. How about that, Steven?
That sounds good.
Okay, so the first thing I'm gonna ask you, Steven, is because I met you at Gamescom 2018, and one of the things that you always keep bringing up, and one of the things you said really early on when I joined the community back in 2017, you wanna deliver the experience people our age, we're about the same age, had when we first started playing MMORPGs. So
yes.
What?
I think that's always the funny thing is, like, I think a lot of people go into game creation as a result of the nostalgia they have for the games they experienced when they were younger, whether it be MMOs or real-time strategies, whatever it is. A lot of developers, I've noticed, they always have this nostalgic memory of their experiences playing the games for the first time, and that's something they want to bring back. And so I share that obviously with MMOs.
Okay, so what is like, if you say this, what is like one of the key experiences that you want new people to, like new players, people that never played MMORPGs before? What is like the key experience you want them to experience?
Ooh, that's a good. There's a few. I would say first and foremost, something that's not entirely unique to MMOs, but is pretty core to the idea of what the MMO genre is just being able to meet new people. Right, is being able to be introduced into a community, a social environment, and just discover, people that you would not have met before as you become part of like guilds or, a faction or, walking into a dungeon and like looking for group, like that whole LFG kind of mentality. That's probably my favorite aspect of MMOs. But then, there's obviously other nostalgic components. It's like getting a rare drop off of a monster and like visibly seeing your power level increase because of that drop, and like being the only person that got that drop. That's a fun thing. Having roles that are integral to experiencing content and being that specific role that people are looking for, and being able to provide that progression because you were able to fill a spot, in a group of strangers. I think that's a pretty cool experience. Being able to complete something that no one's done before, like downing a boss or finishing a dungeon or going out there and being the first to do something. I think that's pretty cool too. These are all like elements of MMOs, exploration, just going out and being the first person to reach a mountaintop and look at a vista and post that, like discovering hidden gems or Easter eggs in the game that the developers placed secretly, like those. There's so much. Yeah, absolutely. There's so much in MMOs that I have nostalgia over from the games I played originally.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, Staggerson, how about you start us out with the other questions? Because we got a bunch of them. We got a bunch of questions.
Okay. I was gonna ask about nodes.
Nice.
One thing that like has been a little bit unclear was what are the benefits that are unique to people who are a citizen of a node, and what will like other people miss out on?
Yeah, that's a good question actually, and it's a hot topic from a design perspective, because obviously, you want to have elements of citizenship that are unique and that entitle the citizen, because it is a choice. You don't get to be a citizen everywhere, and you have to kind of lay down roots, so to speak, within. Excuse me. Sorry. Hopefully, does that mute when I do that little thing? You couldn't hear me cough the second time, yeah?
Nope.
Or okay,
Yep,
good.
muted.
Okay, cool. So you want to be able to provide the unique aspect of your choice, because you can only be a citizen of one node. So right now, there's obviously discussion about like, all right, certain services you must be a citizen to interact with that service, and those might be more delegated to service buildings, right? They might not be the generic or static services that come with a node when it levels, but more along the lines of like the buildings that node intends to build. There are limited functions and services that non-citizens can gain access to as a result. Obviously, you want to attract traffic, you want to attract commerce, you want to attract taxation that's possible, because those are the means by which the node continues to grow. And in order for that to be attractive, you must offer it to non-citizens alike. But then there's higher elements of that service, like, for example, there may be merchant tables that only citizens have access to. Those merchant tables might relate to specific type of enhancement stones, or specific type of stat migration abilities. You might have access to mundane crafting benches, but the upper tier crafting benches are for citizens only. Citizens only have access to the reliquary and the achievements that the node has from its citizens nearby areas and content, like raid bosses that they might kill. They may have a weekly allotment of what specific type of core material they can access from the reliquary, and only citizens can do that. But at the same time, you might have added bonuses. Like, for example, many people might be able to partake in quests, right? We don't want to necessarily be super lockout on content per se, so most quest lines are still going to be accessible from non-citizens and citizens alike. However, the reward tables for those quests might be higher for citizens, right? You may have additional rewards that be granted based on quest completion and progression. These are you might have access to certain types of buffs that occur during like events, and only citizens can have access to those types of buffs. There are obviously going to be title structures within organizations, within religions and stuff that relate to these events and procedures that citizens, only citizens can be part of that title structure for that specific node. Those are the ways we're kind of thinking about making sure that citizenship is a relevant piece of your decision-making process, and it has its own perks and rewards, but at the same time, it's still a community-driven, component that players can be participating in.
You don't have to be lonely anymore at citizensonly.com.
Is that the farmersonly.com? Nice, I love that.
Okay. Another
Big plug to you farmers out there. No, just kidding.
Another thing that's been talked about is like trade routes between nodes. What benefits are actually unlocked by making a trade route with a node? Like,
so it depends on the trade route, right? We're talking about like from a diplomatic standpoint, the ability for the mayor or citizens to set up NPC routed trade routes between nodes as a trade agreement or as a diplomatic process. Those are important because one of the things we're toying with from a design perspective is that nodes will have specific types of commodities, right? So commodities being unique to the sense of that particular node or that node type. There might be a selection of commodities that node types have available to them. So for example, this node over here might have, access to cotton as a resource. And when that node processes that cotton, it might be some, very nice type of linen that only that node, or very rarely nodes, would have access to. So when you initiate a trade route, you're bringing its supplies that the mayor has requested because they're trying to build, let's say, a specific type of service building, or they're trying to unlock a blueprint that they have access to now to build up their node, and they have to bring in stone from other, nearby nodes they may have partnerships with. When that stone arrives as a payment back to that node, they might get a specific amount of that node's commodity, right? And that commodity now is a material component cost of certain upgrades that the corresponding node has available to it now. Alternatively, establishing these trade routes help to progress that diplomacy and the benefits that citizens on each end of that node have as a result of those successful trade routes. And those could be in the realm of quest lines. They could be in the realm of resource management. They could be in the realm of, defensive pacts. There's a lot of different things that establishing these diplomatic agreements provide the node benefits with, and each corresponding node that's participating in that type of arrangement.
Okay. The node reliquary. What happens to it now when a node is sieged to 0?
It becomes an available spoil for the attackers. So, the reliquary provides a house essentially for relics, and the relics are embodiments of certain types of achievements, right? You may have the the scale of a dragon that's been defeated, the all scale aspect of it, and from that every week, a citizen might be able to derive one scale material component that can be used across a plethora of high-end types of crafting needed. When the node is destroyed, the reliquary's contents become available for spoil amongst the attackers, and now they, even though they weren't citizens, might have access to sorry about that. Might have access to that. What they wouldn't have access to before, because they weren't a citizen. They'll have access to grab a number of those instances of that material, and that's going to be an important aspect, because relics are going to be important as part of the whole crafting scheme, right? So this it acts as an incentive for players to want to engage in battle with these nodes and try to take what they have.
Okay. Because I think, yeah, never mind. I remember before when the node just was de-leveled, there was a different system. So that's cool. So you get to take them back to your node now?
It's not so much taking back to the node. So the reliquary has, let's say, for example, there is a dragon nearby, and this dragon is a large raid boss, and the number of citizens that the node has that participates in that raid, the first time, if you have 30 citizens present, you may not achieve the relic, right? And it's not a matter of capturing it at that location and taking it back to the city. It'll automatically manifest within the reliquary if a number of citizens accomplish a particular achievement a number of times necessary to create the relic, right? So if you only have 30 citizens present at that raid boss, you may need to do that raid boss 4 or 5, 6 times in order to unlock the achievement which grants the relic in the reliquary. Right, so it's it's essentially incentivizing the citizens to participate in the world events around the node, and that's a way to get them involved, with what's going on outside of the node specifically. And then when that becomes available, then citizens obviously have access to it. And then the other component of relics that's important to note is that it's not just adventuring relics. These are accomplishments that span a lot of the different progression paths. So, you could have accomplishments get unlocked by how many number of citizens achieve, the creation of a particular type of item, right? You may have now an alchemical genius that is a citizen of your node, and as a result, there is an alchemical relic that's been granted to your reliquary, in a similar fashion to the dragon.
Okay, so the reliquary is more like a achievement stockpile of its citizens?
Correct. That's correct.
Okay, to add to that question,
Mm-hmm.
because you said something about when node gets destroyed, and the winner of the siege, how do they get access to the relic, right? How does that system then work?
They get essentially. So what happens when the node gets destroyed is there will be stockpiles of spoils. So where the warehouse once was, there will be a debris field, and that can be interactable with. There will be materials and gatherables that are present there as a result of what was previously warehoused within the node.
Okay.
There will be a stockpile and and debris field around the reliquary, and that will be the access to the reliquary stockpile. There will be at town hall. There might be some tax-oriented certificates that can be looted that was kept within the vaults and the treasury. At the stables, you might have what were once housed mount certificates that can be added to caravans in the future or sold on the auction house that players can loot. A whole host of what is centralized within a regional economy like the node system becomes a portion of that becomes available to the attackers who participated in the siege, and they can go and interact with those debris fields and attempt to claim things.
Oh, nice.
Okay. Oni, do you want to go?
Yeah, sure.
And to be clear, I do see Lurikson asks if neutrals can swoop in and take the loot. So the looting rights have a period of time in which the attackers have loot rights, essentially. So these are people who participated in the attack. They were flagged attackers during the siege, and they have first dibs. And then if after that period of time, similar to a monster you might kill, right? That looting right dissipates, then it becomes open for neutrals. Potentially could come scour the battlefield as well if there were remaining things, but it's unlikely. I would imagine.
Can you imagine a big siege at a metro, and then somebody comes in and ninja loots everything?
Who would that ninja looter be? I wonder.
He would be a
very slow person, a person.
He's better. He's better at watching our chat than we are.
All right, Yoni, you up with questions?
Do you have any thought on the aesthetic, like the aesthetic of the tulnar might have right now? Like Renkai are more Asian themed. The Pirai are Native American. The Dunir are supposed to have like a more Viking-esque theme.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have our influences for the tulnar. I'm not sure if we've announced them yet. I probably would hold off on that until we actually start showing some of the tulnar work. But again, the idea behind the tulnar was that they're a culmination of the leftover races, right? Not just the leftover major race populations, but the leftover minor races as well. And that's what gives them their attributes that are, bestial or reptilian, humanoid, and that players can, use sliders to influence the visual representation of. But in a similar fashion, their cultural markers are also going to be a culmination of different influences. So they're very differently constructed culture than what is found in the other 8 races.
So they're Americans.
There you go. Yes. They have burgers and French fries. No, just kidding.
With the character customization that you've explained so far, how far can you go with the character customization? Like, can I make a loli dwarf if I wanted to make a loli dwarf? Could I make catgirl tulnars by having the humanoid option and doing the sliders in just the right manner?
I so knew you were gonna ask.
So, in the sense of what you would expect a loli character or a catgirl character to look like, no. You would not be able to create those things. Can you create a feline or bestial influenced, furs and, snout or potential cropped ears, something like that? You might have some agency over those things. Yes, you could probably do some influences there, but it's not going to look in the sense of a catgirl might, at least what you're expecting from other games catgirls to be. It's going to be more realistic. So, yeah.
But if I wanted to do a loli dwarf, like just to pick the dwarf archetype and do the sliders in just the right way?
No, there's going to be constraints to the sliders. So that was one of the big questions as work began on the character creator. How much agency do you want to allow? Pulling like the lower lip all the way down in this weird deformed look, or having like a offset a cheek that's just asymmetrical to the side of the face. Like there's not going to be the ability or agency to create those types of weird character things. However, you will have the ability to move, slide, change, grow, decrease, all those components, but they'll be kept in a more reasonable and presented way. In the same sense, you won't be able to change the appearance of the Dwarven or the Nikuan, the Dunir or the Nikuan races to, in my opinion, create what would be traditionally considered a loli character.
Okay. Well, when it comes to the Ash Secretion races, like we have a. Why did you pick the races that you did in the design choices that you did for the races? Like some of the animals that we have in the world itself is very unique and stuff like that. But for the races, we have a very cut and dry, like traditional RPG, elf, dwarf, and like even more of the unique ones, like the Dunir, not your stereotypical dwarf, but like they're still in that art style of the stereotypical dwarf.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for innovation, right? I think innovating is a good thing. I think, there are areas where you want to push what has been done before to, something that hasn't been seen. But there are also staple, aspects of fantasy genre that I think a majority of players want to see in their experience. And one of those, I think, is races. Players have, through many stories and television shows or movies or games that they played, have a pretty clear perspective of what an orc and a dwarf and an elf, are meant to be in these fantasy settings. And to some degree, over time, I feel, and this is, how I've been, that they begin to associate with a particular race, a traditional fantasy race, in their characters that they generally tend to play. And that obviously can be unique to the game you're playing. Maybe you like the way an orc is, and previously you played elves, but this orc really does it for you, and you want to play that orc. That's for sure a thing. But I didn't feel that it was necessary to recreate the wheel on races from a fantasy perspective. I'm not sure how much that would add to the flavor of the game. Obviously, I think that we're capable of doing unique things within the cultures, and I think we are doing that, specifically like an Islander dwarf race. I mean, like that, that really hasn't been seen before, or like a stargazing noble Vec kind of looking race, right? Like, those things are still unique, and they still bring innovation to the idea of what these races can be. But at the same time, there's a familiarity there that players can feel comfortable with in the traditional fantasy setting.
Yeah.
All
right, BCG. Balls back over to your court.
So, Steven, I'm going to start you up with a community question.
All
right.
We're
going to go towards classes. So, Talons from the community, he wants to know, when are we going to hear more about the various archetypes?
I would say you can expect to hear more about them probably over the next 3 months or so, I would say.
That's good to know.
Any hint on which ones?
Probably a lot of them, actually, I would say. Obviously Alpha 2, we want to have all the archetypes available, in addition to having, some of the classes from a secondary and augment perspective be available for Alpha 2. And, as we're kind of nailing down some of the changes on the combat side and how that's going to reflect on like abilities and skill choices and stuff like that, we're re-architecting what those archetypes look like from a active ability standpoint and a passive ability standpoint, and as a result of that, you're likely to see some community-oriented information be doled out from Margaret and from the community team. So I would say probably over the next 3 months or so. Yeah.
Okay. So the next question is kind of similar to what Yoni just asked in regards to the races. But when it came to the creation of the classes for Ashes of Creation, what made you decide on the classes, and why did you name one class tank? That was a question that was really pushed to us.
So first part of the question is why did I decide on these 8 archetypes? I felt they embodied an equilibrium between the martial art and the arcane arts. I felt that these were tending to be the core class identities that have existed across MMORPGs from a fantasy perspective over time. I mean, each of them has their own player segment that people are interested in. Summoners and support kind of bard and the healer and mage. Those are all arcane elements that I think embody a lot of what we can do from an active ability standpoint that people are traditionally accustomed to. Rogue, ranger, fighter, tank. Those represent, I think, all of the martial elements of fighting classes that players like to see in fantasy games. From a tank perspective, why did I name the tank? There's a few reasons. One is that there are obviously elements of the tank role that could be considered as different types of names, like guardian or steward or whatever. There's things that you could do that, but I feel like tank as a vernacular has become embedded within MMO/fantasy players, and they use it interchangeably with, even if the class name was like guardian or whatever. I feel even though in that scenario players would still refer to it as a tank, like in normal conversation with each other. Oh, we need a tank for this fight. I've never seen in games where the tank obviously was called something else. I've never seen my guild or other players refer to, we need a that name. It's always, we need a tank. You know what I mean? Gotcha. And I felt that it was an okay portrayal of what that role is. And I didn't have as much of a qualm from why that would be called a tank in game per se. I think that somebody did a great write up, actually. It was so funny. I was reading this last month or the month before, of why it's okay in a fantasy setting for the word tank to be used to describe a particular archetype. And they were talking about how tankards existed, and those tankards were strong and capable of carrying the liquids inside, and this could be referred to as a tank class because they're essentially a giant tankard holding a bunch of blood instead of ale. But it was this is a great explanation. I have had some pushback even internally from my own team, from my own designers, about the term tank. And I have said to them that I'm open potentially to thinking of other names for it if it's something that is, a difficult thing to jump over. And I know I've seen the community on multiple occasions say that they don't like the name tank. But I'm not going to make any promises. So,
I get that.
It's something I didn't have a problem with, but I know some people didn't.
I do understand your train of thought when it comes to naming the class tank, because sooner or later people are going to call the class tank anyways in game. So.
Oh yeah. People are asking for DPS or healer. They're not going to be asking for a bot specifically. They might be specifically asking for this and this. But...
Exactly.
Right.
But in regards to melee classes, one of the other questions that I have for you is when it comes to the differences between melee classes, how does the fighter fit in between the rogue and the tank? I know the tank is more towards CC and damage negation. How does the fighter fit in that whole setup between rogue and tank?
Well, the fighter is really a mobile physical DPS. Right, so they're able to traverse the battlefield. They're able to close the gap quickly. They're able to deal damage from a physical perspective. They have.
But doesn't the rogue do the same thing?
Well, the rogue is more physical disable oriented, like applying bleeds or snares or having precision damage that's situational, being stealthy. You know, that's kind of how I view the rogue role. Whereas the fighter is like in your face. You know, you try to get away from me, I'm going to close that gap. You know, I'm gonna deal this burst damage to you. And it really doesn't matter if I'm behind you or if you're bleeding or if I've snared you per se. Like, I am there, I am in your face, I'm doing this damage.
Gotcha.
Whereas the rogue's like, you don't see me, you know, I'm coming in, and boom, I stab you in the back, and I do extra damage because of it. Now you're bleeding, and you're trying to snare away and walking away, and like, you know, that's kind of a rogue, in my opinion, versus a fighter.
Okay, cool. Let's see, Staggerson, you up?
Okay, augment. How many augments can be applied to one ability?
One augment.
From any. Sorry, any.
You can have one active augment on an ability at a given time.
Okay, that was said in the past, and then recently it was changed to like sounded like class augments, and maybe you could add race augments on top of that.
No, you'll have different sources for augments. So your secondary class will provide you with 4 potential augments. You might have an additional augment that's available from like religious progression, and you might have an additional augment available from like a racial perspective. We're still kind of discussing those things, but even if you did have, that would just be a greater variety of options, and then you would have one applicable at a given time.
Okay. Will some augments be locked to certain abilities? Like, you can only apply like one of this racial augment to like a buff ability or something like that.
It's possible. That is something that we, you know, started discussing as we've been approaching implementing the augment system for Alpha 2. It is possible that we might delegate specific types of those additional augments to certain skills only. However, the secondary class augments should be across all active skills. So the 4 schools of augmentation provided by your secondary class choice, those are going to be present across all active skills. And if we did do something along those lines, it would be delegated only to like racial or, you know, specific religious augments.
Do you have any examples of racial augments?
Yeah. Let me think. So, well, maybe I shouldn't, because that's not in stone yet. And by stone, I mean that's not.
Just don't say anything to get Margaret mad. Like,
no,
I don't want to hear it tomorrow.
You know how the community's going to be. Steven said.
Yeah, I know. Let me. I'll pass on that one because there's a few ideas and they're radically different. And we're still going to have to prototype them, and I think test probably with both scenarios, and then land on an option once we've done that.
That's fair.
Okay, would I get the same answer for religious augments?
Yeah, you'll get the same one for that.
Okay, for crafting, we know armor can break and will require resources to fix. Is there a similar like resource sink for mounts?
There is a resource sink for mounts, and that's in regard to like either their health or if they die, essentially. Not the timed ones, but like your normal mounts, if they die, there will be material sinks if you want to hasten their ability to be available again for use. So in that sense, like you'll be required to provide, you know, some type of pet resurrection, like potion or something that can come from the alchemical or the alchemy profession, or you know, if they die a certain number of times, they may have a debuff on them as well within a set period that would require a different type of material component to use. So the idea is, yes, there's some sinks that can improve the return rate of that mount or the performance of that mount if they've died multiple times.
Okay.
But not in the same sense that gear has degradation, because the degradation, you know, the decay on gear, that persists until you put material components back into it. And if you allow it to get to certain stages or to get to a destructed stage, then it requires a lot of material components in order to return back to its
makes sense.
Former glory.
For instance versus open world content, I'm wondering how like the rewards are structured and like will interact with each other or not. Like, what will I get from farming instances? If I farm instances, why will I go into the open world?
Sure.
Those kind of questions.
Yeah, instances are really not intended to be like, grinding or farming areas. These are more utilized to contain the encounter, right? If design has a specific reason for which, they want you to only be able to encounter this area with 8 players, or to only do this boss with 8 players, either from a story perspective, a class progression perspective, racial storyline, whatever, that's where we delegate a majority of the instance use to, not necessarily for places that you can farm or grind repeatedly. So these are specific story arcs that we want to give containment to the encounter around. But yeah.
Okay. I think that's the answer. I have a question from Army asking, can you give some specifics on how open world dungeons are going to work?
Sure.
Better explain exactly what he means. Like in regards to boss rooms.
I'm not sure exactly what they mean. That was the question we have. I assume they mean like, how when you reach the bosses in dungeons, can you be jumped? Is there times there'll be instance or people will be locked out of it?
For the most part, if there are bosses at the end of dungeons, it is possible for you to get jumped. But I'll kind of explain, what the intent there is. So back in the day, circa 2003, I was playing Lineage, right? And this is one of the main experiences that I had about open dungeons as a concept in MMORPGs. Actually, I guess that's not entirely true. There were it's funny enough, there were like open dungeons back in 1992 with Neverwinter Nights on AOL as well. Like I would walk in and they'd be fighting like some Dracolich or whatever, and I'm like, oh, I'm here. I want to help. I'm 7 years old. What do I do? But anyways, no, in Lineage 2, like, I'll give you an example. There was this great dungeon back when I played Lineage 2. It was called Antheris' Lair, or Dragon Valley Cave, DVC, I think it was. And you like enter this dungeon, and like around the beginning, the opening rooms of this dungeon, you'd walk in, there was a main corridor, you could turn left or right, you could go forward. If you turned right, you knew that's going to take you down to like the donut area, the Python pit, and like, you'd eventually have this bridge you'd go over, and you'd enter into Antheris' Lair, which was the giant boss that you could teleport it to after you got to the heart. And it was always cool because, like, when I would go in there with the party and stuff, and we'd be fighting, like the early rooms, they were like a little lower level, right? Lower level monsters. And then as you went deeper, you get higher level monsters until you got really more difficult monsters. So you kind of had like an ecosystem of players that were present in this open dungeon. It wasn't, this is like if I was lower level and I was in the opening rooms and I saw like this party run by, and I'd be like, oh, that's the archer on that server that was like killing a bunch of people at the last castle siege. It's like, what's up, man? And you get to say hi to them or whatever. And they like run by, go to their little spot, and they're like, don't talk to me, pleb, or whatever. Like that interaction of just having people commingle in an area of an open dungeon is, I think, a cool experience, right? So that's why I like the open aspect of it. But additionally, as you were like running through, you could go straight and you could like exist under the little bridge. And if a raid came through and they were going to go to the boss, you'd have an opportunity to be like, oh, I want to join in on that. Even though I'm not necessarily part of the raid, like, group, do you want to leave our hunting ground and just go see what's going on and like experience this fight together? I'm like, yeah, let's go do that. We can experience that. And then if you had rivals that were like, no, we want to stop them. Well, then what you'd have to do as the raid who is trying to complete the boss is you would try to secretly organize together at some location nearby, so it wasn't like seen by other people and they could like shout it out or tell the enemy alliance or whatever. And then you'd run in all together and try to get there before the opposing team has time to get together, unless they had like spies or something, right? And then by the time they're like trying to run down the dungeon, like they're training all the mobs and they're like dying left and right. Some of their party members are dying. They have to like resurrect them. And it's like this little, it's a rush to like, how can they reach you and start interfering with your fight potentially so that you don't down the boss, and they have a time to get their alliance together to try to compete with us then for this boss. That whole interaction, I think, is just a set. It is a unique risk to boss engagements. And I think that can be a very fun and compelling encounter because, not only are you competing with the curated and constructed encounter by the design team and by the game, you're also now introducing a human element through your adversaries that exist within, that are trying to compete with you. So open dungeons, yes, there will be some open dungeons that have bosses at the end of the dungeons. There will be some open dungeons that just have a multitude of dungeon bosses, not necessarily world raids or something. And there will be lots of different rooms, and they'll be progressive in the sense that, in the earlier parts of the dungeon, they'll be lower level. And then at the later parts of the dungeons deeper down, they'll be higher level. And more difficult. And that creates, again, I think, an ecosystem of where players across a multitude of levels have an opportunity to coexist within certain areas of the world. And that's good from a social dynamic. It's good from a recruitment dynamic. It's good from just a liveliness and relevance of particular areas so that you don't end up with these locations that, once you pass a certain level, it's empty, so to speak. Yeah.
So none of the open world dungeons or raids, they're gonna have boss rooms that get locked as soon as somebody starts the encounter.
There might be a couple of those,
okay.
But for the most part, I would say no.
All right. Okay. Good. Staggerson, you got any more questions?
I think that was it. I was gonna pass it on to Yoni.
All right, Yoni, you up?
Okay. What are we on? Weapons.
Weapons.
When do you think we will be able to equip weapons in our ranged weapon slot? What?
Yeah, ranged weapon slot. So right now the idea is, and this is something that actually is open to change by the design team as we're going through the as we have been going through the reflections on Alpha 1 and what changes we might want to incorporate in these pitch phases, how the range slot interacts with your main and offhand slots. The idea is that you will have a range equipment slot that can have the ranged weapon in it while you have your main and offhand slots as well. So you could have a sword and shield, and you could have your bow or whatever other ranged weapon is equipped to your back, essentially. And as you commit a skill that might have a range component to it, like let's say you use power shot, you click power shot, you quickly switch over to the ranged weapon, execute the skill, and you're back to your primary focus, right, which is the sword and shield. And then for weapon attacks, like your Q or your left mouse button, you would have the option to set which is your focus, the ranged weapon or the main offhand selection. And you could swap back and forth between that as you want, necessarily. That's currently the intended interaction for ranged weapon slot and main offhand slot. And what that does is it alleviates, obviously the inconvenience of having to hot swap on a hotbar, let's say, weapons between skill usages, because we want there to be a variety of skill selection available across certain classes. And I think especially with the augment system and how that can fundamentally change an active skills ability and how it functions, you want that type of ease of gameplay. So that's a current thinking on ranged versus main offhand.
Going back with range, I guess. Will we get any longer range free aim weapons like we had in APOC, able to snipe players from long distances?
That is a good question.
Please say yes.
Obviously, one of the problems with that is going to be the size of engagements that we're intending to have, right? So when you think about what we were able to achieve with Alpha 1, I think one siege we had about 350 people, and ran well from a server's perspective standpoint. And we just recently have done some optimization on getting above 1,000 rendered players on screen with some okay FPS, and we'll continue to push that further. When you have skills that have really far distance capabilities, what that means is you need to be able to draw characters at that very far distance as well, right? So if we have, let's say, a 200-meter capable skill, like some projectile, and you have 1,000 players on screen, we have to do some aggressive, culling algorithms to draw down the number of players you're going to see at any given time. Most of that's going to be proximity based, right? So if outside of 1,000 player engagement, if you're capable of seeing players at 300 meters, great. But when you get into the 500 or the multiple hundreds of players, we have to bring that down because we don't want the server to have to calculate and replicate across all players everything within 300 meters, because when you do that, that's when the server starts to have some problems. So we have to kind of dial in what the net relevancy is of actors or characters during these high density engagements, and that's one of the ways we allow for those types of battles at that size to occur on the server. So the reason I'm explaining that is because as we determine what types of skills and abilities we're going to have, if we have those very long distance skills, that needs to be taken into consideration for those large and high density engagements. And it's difficult for us to make those two things jive with one another very well. So it's probably unlikely that you're going to see, in a similar way to what we had in APOC with like a long bow or the short bow, that type of distance traveled. I think in APOC we had a 250 meter cutoff for the longbow, so you could really get a long shot. You had to lead the target. It had some drop on the projectile. No, how far was it?
Best part about APOC.
Oh, I know. It is. It was a fun thing, and that's usually delegated, in my opinion, to to these to those more to those smaller engagement types of games.
Let me ask you this, because Anzu TV just asked this, and this just gives me an idea.
Sure.
Something similar. Will there be augments for certain classes that might increase the range on certain skills?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, augments can affect a multitude of things. It can drastically change the ability itself. It can change the damage type. It can change the cooldown period. It can change the damage values. It can change the distance. It can dramatically change it from a ranged effect to a melee effect. Augments are essentially they are creating entirely new skills, but they're going to keep obviously some identity with what that primary active ability was in the first.
Crap. I just disconnected. Why did I just disconnect?
Looks like it.
Yeah, sorry. My bad.
That's okay. Are we still live?
We're still live.
Yeah, we're still live. It looks like none of the cameras are there.
None of the cameras ever were still.
Back,
there we go. Back. Hello. We're back.
Right, so who's in? Yoni, you up next?
I'm still
You're still up. Sorry.
We have been given an example of weapon progression where it might add stat effects to weapon attacks, which can synergize with your abilities. But how else can weapon progression affect your playstyle?
Sure.
Can you change attack animations? Is I guess a tacked on one there.
Can you change it? No. So your attack animations with your weapon are actually a mechanic that's going to be associated with the weapon skill tree. So this is something that I spoke about, I think on stream, maybe, I don't remember, but let's say, for example, you're using a two-handed warhammer or something, right? And you have a number of weapon combos that play animation style based on how many combos deep you go into an attack with that warhammer. So the first is going to be like a forward swing. The second is going to be a back swing. The third is going to be, a swing down, and the fourth is going to be some, twirl that you do, right? And that's what we call the combo animation montage, right? The way that the weapon skill tree works is that at different stages of that combat montage, you have available procs that can occur, right? The first swing might be, a small stagger that decreases your opponent's, accuracy by 15%. That could be a proc that you could spec into. That decrease in accuracy, might be a status condition called stagger or bewildered or whatever, and that might exist for 3 or 4 seconds, right? Your second option from a skill tree perspective might be on the swing back. You have some type of tapering slow effect that lasts over 3 seconds, right? Some type of tapering snare, and then the third slap, strike down might be some potential 1 second stun status modifier. And each of these you can spec into additional points to like increase the chance that these proc. You know what I mean? The relevance of that is that depending on what your class skill choice has been, those are going to have synergy effects with the weapon skill tree. So like my skill called, spin to win might do 30% additional damage on a staggered target. So I see when my proc occurs with the stagger effect on my first swing, like for me as a player, I might be only interested in landing that first swing. So every now and then I'm gonna swing once, and then I'm going to use a skill, and then I'm going to come back and swing again because that'll play my first swing montage because it's been interrupted. So I won't move to the second one because I really just want to hit that, stagger effect. So that's going to be how my rotation lines up. However, I might have some skill that, on a stun target, it might be an immediate cast, and it's like some power push or power hit. And that does, it knocks back a stun target. So if the target's stunned when this skill plays, it has an added effect of knockdown. And now they're going to get knocked down for an additional 2 seconds. Now, I might spec into that, and as a result, I'll want to finish through, swing, and then knock down, so I get my chance at stunning that target with that weapon skill, right? You may have items or set bonuses that change at what level those proc occurs. So I may have a full set of, battle armor that changes all third hit combo procs to second hit requirements. And now I have a chance not only on my second hit to land that tapering slow, but I also have a chance to land my 1 second stun proc because I have the full set that changes my weapon progression. So that's the way itemization works with your weapon skill tree, is you can enhance when those weapon skill trees become available in your combat montage, and that can be a relevant factor in how your skill rotations come to play and mixes with your weapon attacks and why it might be relevant. Now, some people might just say, I don't care at all about my weapon attacks. Like, I'm not going to invest a lot of points into that. And if I do, it's going to be primarily like PvE focused, where I'm more comfortable using, just kind of swinging my weapon, and I may not use them as much in PvP. I'm just going to be focused on, skill rotations. That's okay. But the reason for those skill montages, back to your question, is they have a very relevant role in when certain procs come online from a weapon skill tree perspective.
Gotcha.
We don't have a whole lot of time left, but I do want to get this last question in before I pass it on to someone else. Get maybe one more question in. How do you plan on balancing armor types? Why should we wear one type over the other? Like inside Arcade, you have light armor does magic defense and gives you some buffs for this. Medium armor gives you like a mix between heavy and plus it gives you this buff for going two-handed. I don't remember what the medium buff was. And then heavy armor gives you more physical defense. And then inside games like New World, like other games do this too, but like in games like New World, it affects your dodge roll, and like so wearing one's more advantageous than the other.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So there's a few things. Certain armor types are going to have certain type of predominant stat values, right? So there's going to be certain waterfall stats and or certain primary attributes that are available on certain armor types. And then if you want to have the one that's not more prominently available, those will be rarer to get. You'll have to elicit the services of a crafter who's very, capable within that particular type of armor in order to get the non-traditional stats and or waterfalls available. So there's still the ability to get whatever on these, but they're going to have a more they're going to be more predetermined for certain types of stats and waterfalls. Additionally, there'll be certain types of set bonuses granted across specific full sets or partial sets of armor types. There will be a similar function in how damage is mitigated based on the type of armor you're wearing and how that relates to physical or magical incoming damage. So that's something to keep in mind. It's going to be situational. What type of adversary or foe am I facing, and what armor is the best against that to mitigate damage? On top of that, you're going to have certain strengths and weaknesses of armor sets, and those can be spec'd into by your opponents. For example, I might place some type of elemental enhancements on my weapon that, horizontally changes my outgoing damage, and that's going to reflect based on the opponent, on my target opponent, and what type of armor they have available to them to counter that. Armors also are going to be relevant based on, knowing which. So like as you can target a player, you're going to see, what type of armor they have based on a buff they have available to them, because obviously cosmetics can change appearance, right? You might have different silhouettes as a result of that. So we want to communicate that information across buffs. So you're still going to get the information even though cosmetics are present and players can transmog stuff. That's an important component of it. But we have thought of the idea of, obviously we're playing a little bit with the idea of these universal skill sets, such as dodge, parry, block, active blocking, stuff like that, and progression within those areas. There is something to be said, I think, for incorporating itemization choice as part of that system as well, and how it might affect that system. That's something that I think is going to be coming up in the pitch phase here shortly from design as we implement those universal skills. So you can look out in the future for more information on that.
Nice.
Gotcha.
Okay, Steven, we only have you for 1 hour, so I think we only have time for 2 more questions.
3 minutes.
Sure.
All right, so
3 minutes.
The one question actually was one of Yoni's, but I'm just going to ask it now, is we don't have gunpowder, so what sort of ranged weapons will ships have?
Okay, this is probably going to be, I haven't spoken about this in the past, but there was a particular weapon that was pretty unique in APOC. And if anybody can remember what that weapon was.
Yes.
Maybe a pea launcher?
A potion launcher, right. Now I want you to take that weapon that you held and shot potions from and reloaded, and I want you to think of it on a bigger scale, perhaps on the sides of ships. And instead of these gunpowder related cannons, having giant potion launching cannons that don't necessarily use gunpowder, but use some magical alchemical substance to launch that potion.
Okay.
That's the idea behind cannons and ashes. I know we haven't ever announced this before, and I guess that's a revelation, but the potion launcher idea will be incorporated as part of how cannons operate on ships. And these will be very large potion launchers. Obviously, the storage of this ammunitions are going to be very important as well. But, the idea I had for that potion launcher actually back, a long time ago, I don't know however many people saw like Neverending Story 2. But there was the little potions that were like the memories of Sebastian that would come out and like dial down, and the woman would pick it up and she'd be like, "Oh yes, I'm like taking this memory from you." But I really loved the visual of that potion machine, right? And so to the original, I think it was Jeff Deliere who concepted out the original potion launcher. Those are one of the reference images. I was like, I want it to be transparent. You can kind of see into the potion chamber itself and see multiple potions that are present there. In a similar fashion, that cannon will also have some transparency in what potions are available. But also the really cool thing is that it's not just going to be the same cannonball every time. It's not going to be the same potion every time. You can equip the cannon with different types of potions that have different types of effects from a munition standpoint. And I think that's gonna provide a very cool gameplay, because as you see the different color of the trail that's coming out of the potion launched, you'll be aware of what your adversary is using and how that affects your ship, and you'll be able to counter it based on maneuverability, based on whatever you want to counter that with. I think that's going to present a very interesting dynamic to the attacks with these ships.
Okay, so then let me add on that question, and then we're gonna call it quits. When are we gonna see this?
So I think Alpha 2 we have planned. I think having 3 ship classes online. And what that means is, obviously, you know, we have to do a lot of the work on the buoyancy and ship physics and the projectiles and all that kind of stuff. But for Alpha 2, we are intending to have ships in the game. And I think we're targeting 3 class types, personal, group, and capital or raids type ships. They will have cannons, and you know the cannons will be operational. So there'll also be some utility slots there and defensive slots, but it's not likely that the UI and the interface for how to swap those components out and craft those components individually will be present in Alpha 2, but the ships will be, at least.
Okay, so I don't even know if I should ask that last question, but I think I'm just gonna ask it. Alpha 2, what's in store for us in regards to, you know, between now and Alpha 2?
How long did you say we had? No, I'm just kidding.
We have as long as you need, Steven. As long as you need.
As long as you want. If you want to go off topic, go right ahead.
There's a lot planned for Alpha 2. I mean, Alpha 2 is intending to be obviously a very large chunk of the game's mechanics, a very, very big percentage of it. So, you know, there's a lot in store, whether it's, you know, showing all the archetypes, having some of the secondary class options available, the augmentation system, nodes progressing up to higher stages like city, potentially metropolis, having actual sieges present in the real sense, having a lot of the open world and some of the content that's going to be implemented, the naval warfare systems, the auction house, the freehold system, you know, there's a crop rotation, the climate system. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that's going to be in Alpha 2. So, you know, that we definitely have our work cut out for us, right? I mean, this is a lot of work that we're intending to bring online. And, you know, previously I'd said there's going to be a longer period where, you know, what we're showing and what we're talking, we'll be showing stuff as they come online, but, you know, there's going to be some time between Alpha 1 and Alpha 2 because there's so much we want to have present in Alpha 2. I mean, that is going to be the phase before beta. So in that sense, you know, it has to have pretty much a very large amount of the game complete.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
All right, then, Steven, first up, we really appreciate that you were on here today. But
yeah,
I have to ask one last final question, and this is more for the older people in the community because I just saw it pop up in chat. When are we gonna get Node Part 3?
Meaning the last question.
Same response I've given over the last years since Node 2. Excuse me. Nodes 3 will probably be around the end of Alpha 2, I would say. And again, just to reiterate, I know I've said it before, the node series are, I think, obviously nodes are a big mechanic in Ashes of Creation. They're the biggest mechanic that we are constructing. They're tied into everything. They're probably the most unique component of what Ashes of Creation is trying to be. And in that sense, you know, I consider those to be very big marketing points for the game.
Gotcha.
And so, you know, from a marketing perspective, as you can see, and as everybody in the community sees, as we go from milestone to milestone, you know, things visually just get better, right? We have more assets to lean on. We have more refined aspects of our character models. We have more refined aspects of our props and architectures and all that kind of stuff, and biomes and everything, right? So we want to save the big marketing beats and how, you know, nodes are presented, nodes being nodes 3, right? For when we have a much more mature visual representation of the game. And in that sense, that's why I would say it's probably going to be around Alpha 2.
Gotcha.
Nodes 3 has become such a meme. Now,
I love it.
Yeah, but I don't think anyone remembers that it's supposed to be a 4-part series. So this is Nodes 4 after that.
There's Nodes 4. Yeah, there's 4 parts.
I didn't remember
Nodes
that.
4 will probably be the big, obviously, culmination and crescendo that would happen probably around end of beta, like just before launch. It's like Nodes 4 going comprehensively over everything Nodes series has been, the big, crescendo of the project of from a marketing perspective of like, this is why Ashes is different. This is why every MMO that's come before that says tell your story or dynamic events isn't anywhere near what Nodes brings to MMORPG experiences, right? So we want to make sure that's a very special Nodes
cool.
4.
Would you think about remaking 1 and 2 since it's been so long?
Potentially.
Give update graphics to it and.
Yeah, I've talked about that in the past, as actually with our marketing team about potentially prior to Nodes 3 re-releasing 1 and 2, because that was a long time ago, and you look back at that, and it's actually cool because you get to see where the projects come to based on like Alpha 1 and stuff. But at the same time, it's like those were big hits amongst the community and kind of understanding the concept of what the core gameplay of Ashes is intended to be, and it would be cool to kind of to revisit that and update it visually, and even as we redefine some of the systems, incorporating that as part of the explanation as well.
Agree.
All right. Well, we've taken up an hour of your life. You're never going to get back. So
Exactly. So again, Stephen, thanks for joining us.
Absolutely, I enjoyed it. It's very fun. Of course, I love discussing all things Ashes related. It's always fun to discuss it with fellow gamers. You guys have been doing this now 100 episodes, so big props to you guys. That's a lot of dedication, a lot of time on your end.
Thank you.
And I think you guys have fun discussions. You guys, you don't necessarily stay on the railroad per se, and that's always fun because a lot of content creators do. They're very methodical in their presentation. That's a good thing, not a bad thing, but it's always fun to be a little bit loose and to discuss things kind of fluidly. And
we're pretty good at that.
Yeah.
Loosey goosey, baby, loosey goosey.
All right. Again, Stephen, thanks for joining us. Everybody, thanks for watching. We appreciate it, and we will do our best to do another 100 episodes.
Alrighty.
See you 4 years down. See you 4 years down the line with episode 200.
Exactly. Episode 204 years. Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.